All right, my renowned fam, welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Stephen Morris, and as always, I bring you the top tier guests. And today, my guest is the author of Passion Struck, coming out. Actually, it's already out. It came out February 6th, but it's out today. Make sure you go get it. And John Miles, how you doing, John? Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Stephen, so happy to be here. And what a great name for a show. Renowned Leadership. Love it.
I don't even know how I came up with that name. I remember sitting there like, what should I call my company? And Renowned Leadership just came to my mind, and it's like, okay, I'll go with it. And yeah, it's like one of those brainchilds that you just absolutely love. I don't know if you've ever had those things. You're like, oh, this is a great idea. And then 10 days later, you're like, that was so stupid. Like Renowned has not, it's never been that way where I'm like, oh, I wish I would have come up with this name or something like that. I absolutely love it. So thank you for that. That actually means a lot to me. You have no idea. But tell us about your book real quick. Well, first tell us about you and then tell us about your book.
So I say I'm a recovering senior executive, but I'm a former Navy veteran who, after I left service, went into Big Four consulting, and then that ended up leading me into industry. I spent a lot of time with Fortune 50 companies, culminating with reaching the C-level. And I guess while I was on that path, I really found that there was something inside me calling me to do something different. I was called to serve, and it eventually led me to really getting into personal mastery and self-improvement myself, which culminated me in starting this company called Passion Struck, which has led to the podcast, the book, coaching sessions, and all the rest of the things we do.
I love that. And, I always, with my clients or on the show, or, when I do interviews or whatever, I always say that leadership starts with yourself. You have to be able to lead yourself. And in order to lead yourself, you have to be on a perpetual, never-ending journey of self-development. And, the first thing I tell people is you got to sit down in front of a mirror for a solid 2-3 hours and just look in your eyes, look as deep into your soul as you can, and find all that dirty stuff that we try to hide from the world and ourselves. And you got to find ways to deal with it, accept it, all those things, man. And so, what your the Passion Struck format is 12 steps, correct? Can you walk us briefly through those 12 steps?
So let me give you a little bit of background.
Okay.
So similar to you, I didn't really have a name for what I was doing, and I had been on this path of writing blogs and trying to put a concept together around what I wanted to bring to the world. And I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, Keith Crotch, who people may know him. He founded Ariba. He then became the CEO and chairman at DocuSign. But anyway, we were talking, and I started telling him that I'd been researching luminaries like himself, General Stan McChrystal, Oprah Winfrey, Mark Benioff, astronauts. And I kept seeing this state where actions, intentions, and aspirations weren't just aligned, but they were so deeply infused with unwavering dedication to personal excellence and an enduring commitment to self-actualization. And I was telling him that you just go from being stuck in your life to feeling this. And he goes, well, it sounds to me like you've gone from being stuck to becoming passion struck. And man, the light bulb went off. And as you could guess, like anyone, I go and Google it afterwards, and I found out that it's a perfume from Victoria's Secrets is the only name for passion struck. And so my next step was I go to GoDaddy thinking no way in hell was this ever available. And there it was, just for the taking. And so at that point, I thought there's no way I could ever become ranked number one, given that it's a perfume. And 4 years later, it's everywhere. So Similar to you, it's one of those names that once I heard it, I never looked back. But getting to the 12 principles that I talk about in the book, as I mentioned, I had been studying these juggernauts, and I ended up doing this research for a period of about 7 years, ended up studying over 700 different individuals who were able to 10x their lives. And out of that, I kept seeing these recurring patterns coming up again and again. And I started this by examining 30 of these patterns, and I whittled it down to the 12 that I found were not only most reoccurring, but were most impactful at driving personal change. And so that's what the 12 represent. And I organized them into 6 mindset shifts and 6 behavior shifts. So if I go through them really quickly, it starts with being a mission angler, which is about life crafting. It then goes to second principle is becoming a brand reinventor, which is really about the practice of constantly reinventing yourself. The third is a mosquito auditor, which is learning how to cultivate both positive influences in your life and a positive environment. The fourth principle is to become a fear confronter, which is really how do you confront self-sabotaging behaviors. The fifth one gets into the concept of becoming a perspective harnesser, which is really how do you get out of linear either or thinking and start approaching things with both and thinking. Number 6 gets into the concept of becoming an action creator, which is really understanding that action leads to action. And that rounds out the mindset shifts. And then the behavior shifts starts with how do you achieve the zone of optimal anxiety, which is really about how do you achieve this consistent peak performance zone that is so crucial if you want to up-level your life professionally or personally. I then go into the originality embracer. So this is how do you maximize being original and being adaptable. I then have the boundary magnifier, which is kind of how, if you're trying to audit out these negative influences, this is about how do you create more meaningful boundaries in your life. That then leads us to something that I call the Gardener leader, which is a new form of leadership that I think is needed in the world. And then lastly, to the conscious engager, which is really about the power of unwavering focus in our lives.
I love it. I'll admit, and unfortunately, I didn't have the time to read your book. Even though your team offered to send it to me before this, but I just didn't have time. But when I saw the 12 powerful steps, like that's cringe for me, because everybody's got a 5-step to this, a 12-step to that, a 38-step to get what you want in life, the 1,362 rules of personal development. And it's like, dude, it's too much. Like, stop it. Like, relax. Let's narrow it down to just a few simple things. But I do it. I have to admit, your 12 steps sound doable. I'll say, and it's not because I feel like it's one step that you've just broken down. Like this is all wrapped up into one thing, and you've just broken it down into 12 bite-sized consumable parts. So I applaud you for that. One of the things I love or one of the steps I absolutely loved is brand, reinventing your brand, retaining your brand. I don't think enough people in this world think of themselves as a brand. And when I say think of yourself as a brand, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, when you're marketing yourself to companies, you need to treat your life as if you're the CEO of a giant brand, because you are. My life is my company per se, and I treat it as I run my life as I run my business. And so if you would talk about what it means to brand your identity, brand yourself.
Stephen, first, I want to just comment that I myself am not a huge fan of the 12 steps or the 5 steps or this step or that step.
There's just so
And
many.
the subtitle of my book, when I originally presented it to my publisher, was Unlock Your Purpose, Ignite Your Most Intentional Life. And they had to throw in the 12. So I guess from their perspective, it sells more because it looks like you have a framework, which I do. But you're right. These 12 principles all align to one goal, and that's how do you mold your life in the pursuit of becoming your ideal self. And to me, you can't do that in one step. There's many
Right.
different things that go into crafting that life that you want. So to answer your question about the brand reinventor, I always like to talk about this in this way. For anyone who's listening, this is such an important thing for you to understand. You are the most incredible person that you will ever meet. And now that you know that, don't you want to showcase that most incredible person to the world? To me, that's really the beginning and end of what your personal brand represents. It's how you want to project yourself and who you are to everyone around you. And I think my whole concept of brand reinventor is a little bit different, but just talking about this personal brand, a lot of people say, well, I don't really need a personal brand. I'm in sales. I'm not out there like a personal influencer. And my advice to them is you've got this completely wrong in your head. Just think about being a realtor. If I am looking to hire someone, some of the first things I start doing is looking for them on social media to understand what is this person about. Or if you're going on a sales call, I'm going to try to look into who's the person who's trying to sell me something so I understand more about them. It's so critical to have these brands. And when I was growing up, the companies that I was working for absolutely didn't want us to have it. But looking back, I wish earlier in my life, I would have started going down this path, because once you put yourself out there and you start projecting this, it has huge positive benefits to you. But on
Uh,
this whole top, yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
and I can stop there and you can ask me a question, or I can go on to explaining the
No,
brand
no, keep going. Keep
reinventor.
going.
So one of the things I talk about in the book is, as I was doing research for this, I came across this guy, Dan Schwabel, who's a partner and research director at Future Workplace. And he's interviewed more than 1,200 what he calls remarkable individuals. They were similar to the people I studied: CEOs, celebrities, authors, politicians, etc. And throughout his conversations, the most prevailing characteristic amongst all of them was that they were in the consistent pursuit of reinvention. And I want you to think about that, because this world we are going into right now, which is changing before our eyes, necessitates that we're going to have to get used to reinventing ourselves and our skill sets. And the way that I write these chapters in the book is I try to lay out the principle, I try to introduce it with behavior science or psychology, and then I try to tell a story. And I think one story that I think is great for this podcast is I talk about my friends who are the horse soldiers. This is Mark Noosh, who led the team in the movie 12 Strong. And they have come up with a whiskey brand now. It's co-led by a couple other Green Berets, Scott Neal and John Coco. But you look at these guys who were made of military steel, but they had found themselves in this place where they were looking for something new. They were looking for something different to do, where they could apply the acumen that they had learned in the military to a different discipline. And for them, they ended up discovering a love for bourbon, and it took them all the way to Scotland, all over the country, looking at different distilleries, and eventually to craft this new brand and to craft a new brand for each one of them, which has become now one of the best-selling bourbons in the world. And the simple fact is that when we start to focus on reinventing or improving any area of our life, it ends up improving every area of our life. And I think that's something that people need to understand, because these small reinventions in one area cascade into 10xing so many different components of who you become.
Yeah, I can totally relate. And that's funny because I know for those guys, probably for you, how long were you in the Navy for?
It was in 11 years.
11 years. So yeah, definitely you too. Like, uh, I was in the Army for 16 years. And when the Army was my identity, right? The Army was my brand. And when I left the Army, I no longer had my identity. And that, I feel like that's the danger a lot of people get into. They latch on to this one thing in their life, and they don't let their brand, they don't let their identity, their brand, speak to what they're doing, rather than they let what they're doing speak to who they are, if that makes sense. And that's totally what I did. And that, I guess in the Army, in the military, it's kind of got to be that way. But yeah, when I left, I had no identity outside the military. And that was the hardest thing I've ever freaking done in my life, was go from being a soldier to a civilian. Um, that was a very long 3.5 painful years of trying to re-identify who I am and reinvent myself completely, because military doesn't translate to civilian very well. You become very unpopular very fast. So no, totally. And I've never actually thought about the correlation of branding yourself that way. So I appreciate that thought. That was very impactful for me.
Not, no, I mean, but you're very correct. I mean, I have a really good friend who's a retired Navy SEAL, and he's been retired now for probably 13 years, but his entire identity is still that he's a Navy SEAL, which is absolutely fine as your basic foundation, but you've got to evolve in life. And to me, being a veteran is definitely part of my identity, but I have grown and evolved so much since then that it's just now a component of who I am, but it makes up a portion of my identity. But I am constantly trying to look at what's happening and where I want to go, and constantly striving to become my ideal self. So your identity ends up shifting with it as you keep reinventing yourself over time.
Yeah, I agree completely. The next part of your 12 that I really liked was harnessing fear, or fear harnessing. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but that is also key for me, because naturally I'm one of the most fearful people you'll ever meet. I'm pretty much scared of my own shadow a lot of times. And that shocks people because, I've jumped out of airplanes. I've, been to combat. I've been shot. Like, I've done some pretty scary stuff in my life, and people are like, do you refer to yourself as a fearful person? And I feel like a lot of people, they get confused. They think they need to not have fear, rather than I'm scared. I don't let fear stop me. And I understand that there's good fear and there's bad fear. There's good fear that's like, hey, don't jump off the roof of that house, it'll hurt you. And then there's the bad fear of, hey, this house is on fire. You got to jump off the roof to survive, but your fear of hurting yourself from jumping off the roof stops you. If that analogy makes sense, I don't know. Anyway, I digress. But no, the harnessing fear is so key. Starting my own company, starting this podcast. My last couple of years in the military, I was so fortunate. I got to travel all over Europe and Africa and Asia, and speak and on leadership and small team development. And it was such a great experience. I got really used to public speaking, and I thought starting this podcast, oh yeah, it's too easy. I've spoken in front of generals. I can talk on a podcast. What I didn't realize is this is a completely different monster. And I found myself really struggling. If you go back and listen to my very first one, it's bad. But so like all of a sudden I was over, when I realized, like, oh, this isn't the same thing. All this fear like crept into my life. And it was hard to do this podcast, starting my own company. That was, man, like I didn't just like, uh, you know, accidentally stumble into this. Like I went all in. I'm like, I'm doing this thing, and hell or high water, it's going to happen. And where's my money going to come from? Lots of fear. And but you can't let that fear stop you. Can talk about what in your life, what harnessing fear means to you.
So I earlier said that one of the most important things that people need to realize is that they are the most incredible person that they will ever meet. The second thing you need to understand is you are your biggest competitor that you will ever meet. And the reason you're your biggest competitor is because of this concept that I call we become a visionary arsonist to the very things that we want to accomplish in life. We can have the best intentions for personal growth and achievement, but we inadvertently undermine our own progress. And I'm sure you've seen this. We set these high ambitions, we dream big, but then we engage in these behaviors where we arson the very goals that we're trying to achieve. And to me, it's as if you want to run a marathon and you set that as your goal, but then you constantly start changing your training routine, you change your diet, you even change your goals, and then you say, no, I'm going to run a half marathon or a 5K marathon or whatever. But it ultimately leads to hindering your progress rather than helping it.
No,
So that
totally. Yeah. I see people do that all the time, and it's settling. I want to run a marathon, then all of a sudden you realize how hard that is. I mean, I don't know how many people know this. The very first person to run the marathon died when he got to the finish line. It wasn't like a sport at the time. It was I believe it was a Greek messenger running back to tell the army the enemy was coming or something along those lines. But anyway, that's where the odd number comes from. But he ultimately died from doing what he did. And then we're like, oh, hey, that seems like a great sport. Let's start doing that. Anyway, but yeah, it's incredibly hard. What is it, 26.3 miles? Like, good grief, that's a long way. And now we have people that can run ultra marathons, 100 miles, 500 miles, and at one time. And people get like, oh yeah, I want to run a marathon, and then they realize like, holy crap, this isn't easy. And so then they're like, okay, so this is pretty hard. I'm gonna settle for a half marathon. Well, 13 miles is still pretty hard. So then I'll settle for a 5K. That's only 3.5 miles. I
and I
feel
think what
like our
yeah,
tolerance for hard has gone so far down for most of us. And I don't know why. But no, I totally resonate with that. That is such a good point.
I think part of the why is we have so much instant gratification in our life now that when it comes to goals we want to achieve, we want to get there as quickly as possible, which is absolutely fine. But the thing about fears and self doubt that we're talking about is to me, it's like experiencing burnout. It doesn't happen overnight. It often starts with you setting clear personal goals, but over time, you get sidetracked by the distractions in life or changes in priorities or overemphasis on unimportant details. And it's this gradual shift that's often unnoticed. And we end up getting caught in this cycle of setting goals, but then engaging in behaviors that prevent us from achieving them. And it's all of a sudden you find yourself farther and farther from the destiny that you want to do. And then it's acknowledging that you're there and having the self-awareness to recognize the patterns and to break yourself free from these counterproductive behaviors.
Right. And having the mental discipline to be honest with yourself, I think, is key, and say, you know what, I am overweight and it's not okay. And I don't want to fat shame anyone, but science, medicine is medicine, and life expectancy for people that are overweight is way low. And so, I mean, there is something about being healthy. You know, David Goggins is a great example of that. Went from being obese to a Navy SEAL. That's not easy to do. And David talks about in his book Unbreakable. Is it Unbreak or You Can't Hurt Me? That's what it is. By David Goggins. He talks about having an accountability mirror where he writes what he wants to do. He sticks it on his mirror with on a sticky note, and he sees it every day when he's brushing his teeth and shaving and doing whatever. And that's how he holds himself accountable. I have a my goal journal, and it stays literally next to me or in my backpack. It's with me at all times, so I can go back and look and make sure that everything I'm doing that day in my life reflects what I'm trying to do for my future. What is your accountability mirror? What do you do to hold yourself accountable to your goals?
Yeah, so I do a journaling practice as well. But I have a whole morning routine that I do. I get up every day at 5 a.m. And the first thing I do is I take my lab for 3 to 4 mile walk. And I love that time in the morning because it's one of the only opportunities that I get in the day where everything is quiet. And it allows me to spend the first 15 to 20 minutes of that walk just reflecting, being grateful, and then I use it to set up my intentions for the day. And I typically do that for the first third. It could be half of the walk, depending on how much I've got going on in my mind that day. And then I try to listen to podcasts and something uplifting to help me further that intention. And then I come back, and the first thing I do is I journal down the things I need to accomplish. I look back at the long-term aspirations, and I do a critical assessment of the things I'm grateful for that I achieved, and also the things that I procrastinated on, that I beat myself on, that I need to set as the top priority for the next day. And this is something I've been doing for years. And that, coupled with then going to the gym, getting that exercise in, everything else sets me up for the day. And I think what people need to understand is some of us are morning people. I wasn't always a morning person. I had to train myself to become one.
Right.
But you need to set out deliberate time for self-care, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to take care of anyone else. And so that's
Say
how I
that
do it.
again. That was good enough to say that one more time.
Self-care is so crucial, because if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not showing yourself self-kindness, if you're not constantly trying to do introspection, then you're never going to be the leader, husband, father, whatever it is in your life that you want to become.
That is so true. So I'm man, I relate to you, and thank you so much, because now people always act like I'm crazy, because I have a total of 7 journals that I keep, and I don't write in all of them every single day. It's just like my creativity journal. When something pops in my mind that's that $1 million idea, I'm sure you've had that happen where you're like, oh, that's a great idea. And then you forget about it, but then you remember it 5 years later. I hate it when that happens. So I have a creativity journal. So when these ideas pop into my head, I just write them down in my journal. Anyway, I keep a stack of journals that I write in, and 3 of them I write in every day. So I write in my goal journal every day. I have like a bullet journal that I write in every day. And then I have what I call a defrag journal. At the very last thing I do for the day before I go to sleep is I free write whatever's in my mind in this journal, kind of like you defrag a computer, get rid of all those junk files. And man, that has improved my sleep. I can't even explain how much better my sleep is since I've started doing that. But anyway, people always act like I'm crazy because I get up at 4 in the morning. My routine's very similar to yours. I get up at 4 in the morning, take the dog out, go for a run or go to the gym, come back, eat my breakfast. While I'm eating my breakfast, I journal and do all that stuff. And people are like, man, you get up at 4 in the morning? Like, yeah, like it's quiet, it's peaceful. No one bugs me. My phone does not ring normally at 4 in the morning. Like no alerts on my phone. Like I can just focus on me. And like you, I hate getting up at 4 in the morning. I am not a morning person at all. I am so grumpy in the morning. But like you said, I need that time to just be me, to just be with me. And about 7 o'clock rolls around, that's when my phone starts going off, and my team wants me, and my wife wants me, and my kids want me, and the world will not leave me alone. So I absolutely love that. And I am so glad I'm not alone in the world, and people can stop thinking I'm crazy now. Now people can think we're crazy. So the next step that I feel is just I don't know. I think this should probably be number one in my opinion, and that's boundaries. Because boundaries, I feel like, are just non-existent in people's lives nowadays. What do you do to ensure you constantly set boundaries, and who do you set boundaries against, or what do you set boundaries against?
So I'm a big, I'm a huge reader of books, and a book that I've always loved is by Jonah Berger, who's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And he talks about invisible influences in our life. And one of the key things that you need to realize is that you have the opportunity to craft the people you surround yourself with and craft the environment that you choose to put yourself in every single day. And so the book really has two chapters that tackle this. The first is something that I call the mosquito auditor. And the way I came up with this is I was on one of those walks and I happened to hear this radio program where the announcer comes on and says, "What is the most dangerous animal on the planet? Callers call in." And so my head was where all the callers were. It's a shark, or it's this mesquite jellyfish in Australia, or a snake, or a spider. And it wasn't any of those things. It was this pesky little mosquito, which kills between 1 million and 2 million people every single year. And I started to think about that. Just like these mosquitoes are often invisible, or we might hear them buzzing, but they're just a nuance. The same thing goes with the human mosquitoes in our lives, or the environments that we put ourselves into. So it's so important to start recognizing those influences and how they are impacting your ability to grow. So the counter side of that is, once you understand who those people are, what those influences are, what those environments are, you have to set up the boundaries that you want to protect yourself from their grasp. And I think the thing that people get wrong with boundaries is consistency. They're not consistent in their application. So
Mm.
your boundaries should really tie to your core values. They should really drive to how you want to live your life. But your core values are very different from other people's. And so asserting yourself firmly to give that line of demarcation between behaviors that you're going to accept and that you're not is tough. But what ends up happening is we assert it, we get a reaction from another person, but then we're not consistent in our application of it. And so then the other person doesn't know what to do. And so they typically double down on their behavior. And when you're inconsistent with your own boundaries, you end up making it even worse. So consistency to me is one of the most important things that I talk about in the book about being a boundary magnifier.
Yeah, I agree completely. And something you said in that struck me, and that it. So I did some research just because I was curious. Um, one of my key philosophies is uh, people get confused, and don't get me wrong, I love Simon Sinek. His book Start With Why is amazing. I love his talks. The guy's brilliant, but one thing I think he misses the mark on is purpose and why. To me, are two different things. To me, I identify as purpose as my external influence. So my purpose is what I do in the world that affects the world around me. and my why is my internal driver. What makes me do the things I do to achieve my purpose. And so I went out and I asked people what their purpose is. Like what's your purpose in life, in your career, in general, what's your purpose? And I'm being very generous with these numbers. I would get one person that would have a great 1 out of 10. One person would have a great answer of what their purpose is. 2 or 3 people would be like, they would have like your typical BS answer that like you would read on a post-it note or something, or on calendar, a meme or something. And then about 6 out of the 10 would just be, I don't know, never thought about it. How many people, I say that to ask this question, how many people do you think just in the world have actually thought about what their core values are?
And less than you would ever possibly imagine. Or they have thought about it, but they don't write them down, or they don't practice them. So I would think the number is very low, probably less than 20%.
I agree. Why is it important to you to know exactly what your core values are and to make sure they're implemented into your daily life?
So in the book, and I'm glad you brought up Simon Sinek, I bring up that I think there are 3 extremely important ingredients for self-realization. It's passion, perseverance, which form the concept of grit that Angela Duckworth writes about.
Love
But
Angela
there's
Duckworth.
but there's one missing ingredient that, as I reviewed her work, I think she leaves out. So as you know, if you've read her book, she starts out by talking about cadets going through West Point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went through the Naval Academy, so I got firsthand knowledge of what this is like. And she says that it's physical abilities, passion, and perseverance that got them through. Well, those things are absolutely critical. As you know, you got to have the physical abilities to get through the trials that they're going to throw your way. You have to have passion to stay through those miserable 4 years and keep persevering with that grit forward in your life. But to me, intentionality is the missing ingredient, because you can have all the grit you want in your world, but that doesn't mean that you're aligning your daily actions with your aspirations and with your core values. And to me, that's where core values come into play. It's the difference between making the easy decision, which is I'm going to take the gouge to cheat on a test, versus taking the harder step that no, I'm going to earn this grade, and I'm going to do it by studying and by doing it myself. And I use that as a hypothetical example, but when I was at the Naval Academy, it was a reality. The class underneath me had the largest cheating scandal in the history of the Naval Academy, and I was on the honor board during that. And I saw hundreds and hundreds of these people make this decision to take the easy path in their life, which had these immense consequences of not finishing the academy. So we really need to think about how we're leading our lives by being intentional, because it's really aligning the choices that you make throughout every single day with who you want to become. And that starts and ends with the core values that you have, which are your guiding compass, which is what intentionality is all about.
Yeah, I agree completely. And when I when we started talking, I said, I hate the 12 steps to this, and I always break it down as simple as possible, and that is integrity. If you lead your life with integrity, whatever that means, then you are going to be successful by your standards. But integrity for all of us is different. It's not just something you can bottle up. My integrity will be different than yours. Um, and I mean, obviously there are certain things about integrity that are universal, but then there are other things that are person specific. But you're absolutely right. Whenever your integrity or your core values are the first and foremost priority in your life, that's the weight of the magnet, if you will, of the compass that's guiding you true north. And there are times where people are like, we need to, on my team or in my life, people are like, we need to do this, and like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm like, well, this would be a lot easier than going this way. It's like my integrity will not allow this to happen. And, even on this podcast, I've turned down guests um, because my integrity would not allow to have that guest on my show because I don't align with what they're saying. Even though they're, maybe a famous person or have a big following, and would, I guess, be beneficial to me. But at the same time, I'd rather do the hard work and build my audience the hard way than take a shortcut and align myself with someone that I don't agree with. Right. So no, I totally agree. I love that. That is so important. I want to go back to mosquitoes, man, because you broke the mosquitoes down into three parts, the three different types of mosquitoes, human mosquitoes, as you call them. Talk. I don't know why. I just think this is so freaking funny. Go ahead and talk about the three types of human mosquitoes.
Hey, Stephen, I will do that. I just wanted to mention one thing on the
Okay.
core value piece. Um, Shockingly to me, when I started Passion Struck, one of the first things I came up with for the whole community was a core belief system, because I wanted people to understand what it meant to be passion struck and some of the core beliefs. And to this day, it is one of the most downloaded things, most visited things on my website. And if someone is really struggling with how to identify their core values, it could be a great starting point for them. So it's free. It's there. It's passionstruck.com/ the passion struck core belief system if you want to check it out. Now let's get to mosquitoes. So I kind of went into this story a little bit when we were talking about boundaries, but I was trying to make this memorable. So that's part of the reason I came up with these brandy names for these different chapters, because when I first wrote them, they certainly didn't have these, but I wanted people to be able to remember these things and to retain it in their minds, because let's face it, the majority of things we look at, we forget. And I didn't want people to forget these because they're so important. So this mosquito auditor, I ended up coming up with three catchy names. There are more mosquitoes than this in your life, but these are three common ones that I think people run into: the bloodsucker, the invisible suffocator, and the pain in the ass. And let me just describe them a little bit. The bloodsucker is the boundary destroyer. These people draw blood by often ignoring professional and personal boundaries that they might make intrusive demands of your time. They question your decisions, offer unsolicited advice that leaves you feeling undermined and disrespected. The invisible suffocators are the people who infiltrate your life with their negative outlook. They often engage in constant complaining, which dampens the mood, affects morale in a team environment, at work, or in social gatherings. And then there's the pain in the ass, who people call the piece of works. And they thrive on drama and conflict. They instigate disputes, they gossip, they create tension and discomfort. And I think we all can recognize those type of people in our lives. And what I encourage people to do is to look at this as if you were looking at either an archery target or a target that you're shooting at, and just start doing a simple exercise of put the 5 closest people to your life, the next circle, the next 5, the next circle, the next 5. So start with 15 people. Think about those 3 definitions that I just gave you. Do any of those people resemble any of those mosquitoes I talked about? If so, they are inhibiting your growth. And now you have this great gift that you can recognize them and it's up to you to do something about it and to enforce the boundaries that you want to have with them. Because you really have two choices. Either you're going to enforce the boundaries, you have three choices. You either let them continue to permeate their negativity into your life and cause toxicity, which is going to keep you from living the life that you want, or you completely get rid of them, which might be difficult for you to do, especially if they're family members or close friends, or you need to start learning how to set proper boundaries with them and be extremely consistent with the practice, like I talked about before.
Yeah, I love that you brought the close family part up, because I tell people the same thing, not near as a clever way as you did. I might have to steal that from you. I'll give you credit, but that is such a good analogy. I love it. But I have several close family members that I've had to completely cut out of my life. And it was painful to do so, but they were just such a negative influence in my life. I couldn't justify keeping the relationship. And of course, I'm there if they need me. I'm not going to let them starve. But at the same time, they do not get to speak daily into my life like they had been. And that it was painful, but at the end of the day, I'm grateful that I did it, because there was just, and the closer someone is to you, if they are one of these mosquitoes, if it's a sibling or a parent or whatever. And I certainly, I'm not advocating, like, just sever ties. I mean, you gotta, don't burn bridges, I guess, but at the same time, you can't let the negativity keep permeating in your life. And the closer they are, the more damage is happening every single time. Have you
Yeah,
ever have you ever had to cut ties in a relationship that was just, you couldn't believe you had to do it?
yeah, I've had to do it a few times, and I'm going to put a song out there that people might know, but might not know what the song is about. So there's this group called the Band of Horses, and they have a song called The Funeral. And I started listening to this song, and I was like, what the heck is he really talking about? And so I started to do some research on it. And the whole song is a metaphor for family gatherings. When he has to go to Thanksgiving or Christmas or weddings or other things, he looked at it as if he was going to a funeral, because he hated the thought of even doing it because of the toxicity that he felt when he was there. And I have certainly had to do this a few times in my life, and sometimes it's extremely painful, because I've let these people in over time. And the one I'm thinking about most clearly was a really good friend of mine, but his ideas and his thoughts over time started to become so extreme in one direction that it was just getting to a point where you couldn't believe anything he was saying, because he had so many conspiracy theories and everything else that it was just beyond believable. And not only was he impacting me, but you couldn't bring him around anyone else because of the things that he would spout out. And I tried to set boundaries again and again. I tried to talk to him about how crazy his thinking had become and how he needed to tone it down. But eventually, he just became such a toxic thing in my life that I ended up having to just start pushing him to the side. And now I don't talk to him anymore.
Yeah. And it is painful, especially if it's a close friend or a family member. But like you said, you can't let that toxicity, permeate in your life. And I think for me, the biggest reason it's so important is because life in general is going to throw um, toxic, negative influences at you. The people in your inner circle, they got to be solid. Otherwise, what life throws at you is going to destroy you. And I know you talk a lot about navigating stress, depression, and especially social media influence. And I have said since the beginning of MySpace that social media is the devil. I've seen social media destroy so many relationships, destroy so many people. Um, and I can't remember who said it, but they said it. The reason social media is so destructive is because all you get to see are the A sides, and we're talking about the old cassette tapes back in the day, where you had the A side, which was all the main songs an artist put out, and then you had the B side, which were the not so awesome songs. And we never get to see the B sides of people's lives. We always see just the A sides. And then when we would compare the A sides to our B sides, we're like, we don't even measure up. And yeah, social media, like I don't even do social media. I do it for my business and that's it. I don't scroll. I don't read. I can't tell you what the people that, my family members are posting on social media. I don't know. I never look. Um, Talk a little bit about how you navigate these things and how you set those boundaries so they don't become a toxic negative influence.
So one of the concepts I talk about in the book, and I'm going to introduce it like this, is we hear so many people out there talking about the fact that people are living on autopilot. And when you hear this analogy, there's truth to it. But if you think about being a pilot, when you put that plane on autopilot, you're still going in the direction you want it to go. You're still going in a direction forward. The more I think about it, and as I was writing the book, another analogy to me was a better representation of how I think so many people are living their life. And that is the analogy of living a pinball life. And if you think about a pinball, so many of us are like that ball in the game. We are just bouncing off every single external validation that comes across our path. We get distracted by the social influencers. We get distracted by what other people are telling us to do. We get distracted by the noise that's going on in our life and our inability to quiet our minds. And we become directionlessness. And it's the opposite of being intentional. We become completely unintentional with how we're living things, living our lives. And then what ends up happening is this inner voice inside keeps perpetuating it, keeps telling us to do the same things over and over. And we get in this constant loop of complacency, like the pinball. And to me, it's really starting to learn, how do you start living life by design instead of living your life as if you're a pinball? And I talk about three things in the book that help you to do this. The first is action, the second is intention, and the third is aspiration. And it's really aligning that action, intention, and aspiration with each other. So you can think of it this way: action are the choices that you're making in the present moment. It's those things that anchor us to the present. It's the choices we make every day, the steps we take towards our goals, and how we navigate our lives. Intention is our ambition or the pursuit of the goals we want to accomplish. And it differs from mere desire. It's the pursuit of specific meaningful goals or the achievement that we set for ourselves. And then aspiration is that path for growth. It's about the ongoing journey of personal growth and self-discovery. But what ends up happening is so many of us act like that pinball, and these things aren't in alignment. And what we fail to realize is that they're not isolated variables. They're all interconnected and interdependent. We can track our actions, analyze our productivity, and evaluate our efficiency, but these metrics gain true meaning when they're connected to our intentions and to our aspirations. And that's one of the most important things I hope people take away from this, is learning to align those three elements. And that's how you start making decisions about, are you going to spend 4 to 5 hours a day scrolling through social media or watching TV or doing mindless things? Or are you going to align those things towards the life that you want to create someday? And if you take the latter approach, then those other activities start going to the wayside because you realize they're just time sucks, and they're keeping you away from how you want to spend the finite time that you have to become that person that I started this whole conversation out about becoming, the greatest person that you will ever meet. But if you keep staying in alignment with this, you're going to become the second person that I talked about. You will become your biggest competitor to the life that you want to achieve.
I love that. And you're absolutely freaking right, man. Like, and it's funny too, because like people will talk about TV shows or celebrities, and I have no idea who they're talking about. I don't watch TV. Like, and I have a rotation of three shows I watch. And it is just I'm waiting for a flight and I have nothing better to do type things. Or I don't know. I watch them very rarely, but I watch NCIS. I love NCIS. It was a great show. I watch Family Guy just because it's funny. And I watch House because it's interesting. But I had I watch maybe an hour of TV a week. I certainly don't follow celebrities. Like I don't know anybody's names. Um and people are always blown away. They're like, how do you not know this person? Like, because I don't care. Like, I don't even watch sports anymore. I love football, but I can't bring myself to watch other people live their dream when like I'm watching someone else live their purpose instead of going and achieving mine. And I just can't do it. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing to watch sports or watch TV necessarily. It's just, it doesn't work for me. I have to be the one going and doing stuff. So I totally agree with that. And man, that means a lot to me. I want to finish with uh, kind of an unrelated question, but um, it's important to me. So bear with me here. Um, Part of like we started with my identity was solely military. Like that is who I was. And to this day, still a lot of my identity is being a soldier. A lot of what I do is being a soldier. Um, Being a combat veteran, a decorated naval officer, how much of your life today is influenced by the experiences you gained from being in the Navy?
And so much of it, ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a leader, and I loved the discipline of leadership. And it was something that even as a young kid, I would read books about, and I would put myself into as many situations that I could where I could practice it, whether it was being a team captain in high school or taking a job at a grocery store and asking for more responsibility. And so for me, getting the opportunity to go to the Naval Academy was a dream come true, because I thought there was no better place to learn it than one of the foremost institutions in the world that teaches it. And then you
I
get
mean,
out
West Point's
into
better, but whatever.
you then get out into the fleet, and I found that oftentimes at the academies you're taught this idealistic view of the world that just isn't true. And so it taught me really that there was a completely different aspect of this in reality. And one of the biggest things that I learned from the military was that you need to listen to the advice of others, because if it wasn't for my NCOs, senior enlisted members, I would have had no success in my life at all, because I didn't know crap. And I had to learn so much from them. The other thing that I really learned is to do the right thing, because especially when you're in these situations in combat and other things, there's so many opportunities to not make the right decision. But if you start training yourself, again, back to your core values, to do the right thing in the situations that you find yourself in, it carries forward through the rest of your life. And then I think the last thing I really learned was the importance of team, and how you as yourself can only accomplish so much, but it's that team together. Let's just take a special forces unit. If you're in a Green Beret team, it's not you as an individual who is successful in that mission. It's everyone doing their unique role on that team. The same thing applies to anything we want to accomplish in life. And surround yourself with the right people, the positive influences who are going to help you to achieve what you want to achieve is so important.
I agree. And when I select the people to be in my inner circle, I would say it is just as rigorous as going through buds or selection or RIP or any of those special forces selections. Like getting into my inner circle is a rigorous process because the importance of the team that surrounds you is so important. And these people speak daily into your life, and you got to make sure that these people are speaking what you need. And so yeah, love that. So we're out of time, but I really appreciate your time, John, and I love what you're doing. I love Passion Struck. I can't wait to read it. Just good stuff, man. Good stuff. And of course, as always, thank you for your service, brother. Um, I know your view on it may be different than mine, but it was the greatest honor I could have ever had was to serve with some of the most amazing human beings on the face of this planet. And I'm sure your experience is the same. So thank you for your service and yeah, all that.
But
Now,
no, thank you too, Stephen, because I think what makes our service different than anyone else's is it's all voluntary. So the people you
right.
serve with are there because they want to serve their country. And so there's something to be said by that. And to me, it's still shocking that only 2% of us have served. So it's always been an honor. But to me, the honor was protecting the very rights and liberties that I so cherish in this country that I live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up your NCOs. I wasn't an officer. I was a NCO, non-commissioned officer. And just last night, I did an interview with an active duty colonel in the Army, and we were talking about his sergeant major and how important his sergeant major is to what he does. And he has complete and total faith, trust, love, support in and for his sergeant major. And all the great officers, all the great leaders in the military, that is the case. They lead on their non-commissioned officers, lean on their non-commissioned officers like no other. They trust them, they love them, and they support them. And that is so important when it comes to your team. You got to lean on those below you and really gather their wisdom and focus on what they're doing. So thank you for sharing that. That is such an important thing, and I love the fact that that's what we're leaving this on. As always, everybody, John's links are going to be in the show notes down below or in the bio. Excuse me. So make sure you go check out his website and give him tons and tons of love. I assume your book is wherever books are sold, so Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all that stuff. I'll have all the links for his book down below as well. Make sure you go pick that up. And of course, once you're done getting his book, head over to Renowned Leadership and give me tons and tons of love as well at renownedleadership.com. Link in the bio below. Before we bounce, John, all my guests, they have the privilege of sharing the final piece of wisdom. So my final question to you today, sir, is what advice do you have for someone to lead like a champion?
The most important thing that you can do if you want to create the life that you want is to start by leading yourself, because you're not going to lead anyone else unless you first lead yourself. And that starts and ends with introspection and self-awareness and getting to the heart of who you are, because that understanding of your actual self is going to help you to understand how to close the gap to becoming your ideal self.
I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself. Love it. Yeah. I'm just going to leave it at that. That's going to wrap it up this week, everybody. Again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining us and allowing me to speak into your life as well as John. Make sure you tune in next week, same bad time, same bad channel. Have a new amazing guest for you. And in the meantime, everybody, don't forget, lead like a champion. Goodbye.